What if I told you that the most forceful thing they have told Lewis Hamilton in years did not come from a rival or a journalist but of his own team leader? What exactly was Frederic Vasseur released him after the GP of Great Britain, and why could he redefine his entire stage in Ferrari? Silverstone was not simply another race in the calendar. It was the public examination of the Hamilton-Ferrari project, an exam that cannot be made up with marketing or with beautiful words. Lewis, running before his people in his talisman circuit, had the tacit obligation to shine, not only for pride, but because the team needed a clear sign that its bet had a future. What he delivered was a correct action, yes, but deeply insufficient. A fourth place that knows more defeat than successful. And it wasn't just him. His partner, Charles Leclerc, signed one of the most gray weekends of his recent career, ending outside the points. The SF-25, which in the previous one promised to make the necessary quality leap, simply did not live up to it. But the most worrying is not the result, but the trend that confirms. Ferrari not only lost ground regarding McLaren, Red Bull, or Mercedes. He lost clarity about his own identity as a team. Hamilton, who arrived with the intention of transforming Ferrari from within, to impose this culture of millimeter technical demand that defined his stage in Mercedes, is running into the structural resistance of a team that continues to carry the same vicious vices. Strategic failures, execution errors, and an internal machinery that still does not find how to work at the rhythm of a champion. With only 103 points in the first half of the season, Lewis is 6th in the World Cup. They separate more than 130 units from the leader Oscar Piastri. And that is not just a statistic, it is a psychological slap. Because while McLaren refines each component of its MCL39 to squeeze up to the last tenth, Ferrari continues to discuss whether its pilots must adjust their driving style or if the car has a balance problem that neither the most experienced engineers manage to solve. That is the real awakening of the Ferrari dream. Understanding, painful but inevitable, that Hamilton's arrival is not a guarantee of immediate success. It is hardly the beginning of a long, complex process, and full of internal frictions. A process that, if it is not clear, can end up devouring even a figure of the caliber of Lewis Hamilton. Because F1 does not forgive. And even less when you wear red. In Formula 1, words weigh as much as the thousandths of a second. Often, a single comment at a press conference can mark the course of a season, alter the dynamics of a team, or even anticipate radical decisions that have not yet been announced. In that sense, what Frederic Vasseur said after the Grand Prix of Britain 2025 was not another statement. It was a break. A dividing line that separates the era from the expectations of the era of the consequences. Until that time, Vasseur had played the role of the protector. It was he who personally took care of Hamilton to sign for Ferrari. He who promoted an optimistic reconstruction narrative, convinced that the Hamilton-Ferrari binomial could be the emotional and competitive engine necessary to return Maranello to the top. During the first races of the year, even when the results did not accompany, Vasseur chose a measured speech. He talked about adaptation, learning, time. But in Silverstone, that patience broke. Faced with the microphones and with a serenity that only accentuates the impact of their words, he said, "A few careers was more a structural problem. Today it was more matter of errors." The car was the potential too. It was the pilots who did not gather everything in the decisive return. He did not mention names. He did not yell. He did not point out with his finger. But in an environment as airtight and coded as Formula 1, they all understood the message. Vasseur was talking about Hamilton, also of Leclerc, but above all from Hamilton. Because the British was not hired to give up to Monegasco, but to make a difference. To raise the team at times where the car is not entirely. And in Silverstone he didn't. This change of narrative also has political implications. Because Ferrari as an organization is a constant pressure machine. The Italian media, the tifosi, the shareholders, all expect immediate results. Vasseur knows that if he continues to defend his pilots without publicly demanding, his own authority will begin to erode. The phrase then was not improvised. It was calculated. A warning. A way of marking territory. For Hamilton, listening to those words must have been a deep blow. Not because he is not aware of his mistakes, but because they represent a break in the tacit pact that had been established when he arrived. He would provide experience, prestige, and work. Ferrari, meanwhile, would protect him while the project matured. Now that balance has broken. And that introduces a new layer of tension. Because if Vasseur begins to show impatience, how long will the environment take to begin to doubt the figure of Hamilton? How long will Lewis himself take to rethink if this is really the battle he wants to free at this stage of his career? In Formula 1, the most dangerous is not the slow car or the rival faster. The most dangerous thing is to lose control of the story. And after Silverstone, that story is no longer dominated by Hamilton. It is dominated by frustration, urgency, and above all, the need for immediate results. And it all started with a phrase, one that changed everything. To understand why Vasseur's statements resonate so strongly inside the Ferrari environment, you have to look beyond the surface. The true crisis is not only in what is said to the microphones, but in what happens in the technical meetings, in the internal emails of the equipment, in the telemetry data that engineers review during the early morning. The current SF-25 situation is not the fruit of a single problem. It is the result of a chain of technical decisions that, when combined, have generated a car with erratic and deeply frustrating behavior for Lewis Hamilton caliber pilots. The first great symptom of this structural crisis is in the rear suspension. Technically, the SF-25 presents a clear deficiency in torsional stiffness. In simple words, the car flex more than desired when it is subjected to intense lateral forces, such as those that occur in high-speed curves or during sudden braking. This causes a gap between what the pilot orders and what the car executes. And for someone like Hamilton, whose driving is based on surgical precision, that lag is not only uncomfortable, it is unacceptable. To this is added a chronic tire adaptation problem. Ferrari fails to put his compounds in the optimal temperature window with the necessary consistency. This means that the car can be competitive for 5 laps and then lose yield without apparent reason. On a grille as tight as that of 2025, that inconsistency translates into losing half a second by return at certain times of the stint. Not that Ferrari is slow. It is not reliable. And that, to fight championships, is lethal. But the problem is not just technical. It is also human. Hamilton arrived with a clear idea, to impose a discipline of work similar to what he built with Mercedes for almost a decade. But in Maranello, culture is different. Decisions are negotiated more than are executed. Hierarchies are not always clear. And what in Mercedes was a perfectly engaged machine, in Ferrari it sometimes becomes an ego struggle, a minefield of diffuse responsibilities. Therefore, what happened in Silverstone has such a powerful symbolic burden. Because it was the first time that a visibly frustrated Vasseur was seen, and a Hamilton without clear answers. Because it was the time when they both understood that the magnitude of the challenge has perhaps been underestimated. And because it was also the moment that the rest of the paddock teams, analysts, media began to doubt whether this alliance really has to succeed in the modern era of Formula One. Even more worrying, it is what is not said out loud. How much margin does this project have to fail before tensions explode? What happens if McLaren continues to dominate, if Mercedes finds stability with Russell and Antonelli, if Red Bull solves his internal problems and is again the unbeatable force of 2 years ago? In that scenario, Ferrari would be relegated again. And Hamilton could face the possibility of closing his career without that 8th title so longed for. So no, this is not just about a phrase from Vasseur. It doesn't even go only from Silverstone performance. This goes from an awkward truth that becomes increasingly difficult to hide. Ferrari and Hamilton promised a revolution. But so far they have only delivered broken promises, repeated errors, and a growing feeling that, if you do not change something in the background and soon, this story runs the risk of becoming one of the greatest "what would have happened if" from the recent history of F1. In Formula One, stories rarely have a closed end. Everything is evolution, change, adaptation. But what is happening between Lewis Hamilton, Ferrari, and Frederic Vasseur has the unmistakable flavor of a story that is redefining in real time. What began as an epic union between a living legend and the most mythical sport, today is a journey loaded with questions, unresolved tensions, and decisions that can no longer continue to postpone. Silverstone was not an accident. It was the turning point. That moment where the masks fall, where the speeches become hard, and where the protagonists understand that time ends. And in this sport, when time ends, so does patience. That of the fans, the team, that of the pilot. And the most dangerous, the patience of oneself. What is coming now is a phase of extreme demand for all. For Hamilton, who will have to demonstrate that he is still able to drag an entire team towards success even when the environment does not favor it. For Vasseur, who must find the perfect balance between authority and long-term vision, without losing internal support or external respect. And for Ferrari as a structure, that he will have to decide if he wants to remain hostage of his own contradictions, or if he will finally do what he always promises, change really. And this is where I invite you to participate actively in this story, because we are not talking about simple racing results. We are talking about legacies. Decisions that can mark the closure of an era for one of the greatest pilots of all time. Of a team that has been looking for its redemption for more than a decade. and of an F1 that is living a deep transformation at all levels. I want you. Do you think Vasseur has done well to raise his voice? Was that tone change necessary? Or was it a mistake that can undermine confidence within the team? Is Hamilton still in a position to lead this rebirth? Or the project is condemned to repeat the ghosts of the past? So subscribe if you haven't done it anymore.